centuries, horror lived in castles. It wore capes. It spoke with a European accent and slept in coffins in Transylvania. But on the afternoon of November 16, 1957, American literature changed forever. The monster stopped being a count living on a mountain and became the quiet handyman living down the road. Today, we aren't talking about true crime. We are talking about the moment the American Gothic was born, and how one real-life nightmare in a freezing Wisconsin farmhouse splintered into the two most important horror novels of the 20th century. To understand the book, you must understand the time. The 1950s was the era of the Levittown suburb. The doors were unlocked, the neighbors were friends. But when Sheriff Art Schley stepped into the Gein farmhouse looking for the missing Bernice Worden, that illusion shattered. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a descent into madness that the public couldn't comprehend. This event occurred just 2 years before another literary landmark, the 1959 murders of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas, which Truman Capote turned into In Cold Blood. This was the precise moment where writers realized that reality had become stranger and crueler than fiction. This geography birthed a new genre, the Midwestern Gothic. Before the bodies were found, authors like Sherwood Anderson in Winesburg, Ohio, were already exploring the concept of the grotesque, people twisted into strange psychological shapes by isolation. The Midwestern Gothic argues that the scariest place on earth isn't a haunted house, it's a flat horizon. The sheer emptiness of the landscape exerts a psychological pressure. It forces secrets inward. In this genre, the terror comes from the repression of the grotesque behind a polite Lutheran facade. The monster isn't an invader, he is a pillar of the community.
We will not dwell on the gore found in that house. History has done that enough. We are interested in the archetypes derived from it. When the details of Ed Gein's crimes were released, they were so unfathomable that literature had to split him into pieces to make them digestible. Robert Bloch took the psychological fragment, the mother complex, the idea of a man so dominated by a deceased matriarch that he absorbs her personality. Decades later, Thomas Harris would take the physical fragment for The Silence of the Lambs, the skin suit, the desire to transform one's physical form by harvesting others. One quiet man became the blueprint for the entire modern horror genre.
Here lies the great irony of horror history. In 1958, author Robert Bloch was living in Weyauwega, Wisconsin, just 35 miles from Plainfield. When news of the Gein case broke, Bloch was already writing a story about a man dominated by his mother. He was terrified to discover that the character in his head was living down the highway. Bloch didn't write a biography, he wrote Psycho. He created Norman Bates not as a monster, but as a tragedy. This introduced the unreliable narrator to crime fiction. We aren't scared of Norman, we are scared for him, until we realize the call is coming from inside his own mind. "30 years later, the seed planted in Wisconsin bloomed again. In 1988, Thomas Harris published The Silence of the Lambs. If Norman Bates was the passive victim of his madness,
Harris's Buffalo Bill was the active architect of his. Harris combined Gein's skin suit obsession with the charm of Ted Bundy and the captivity methods of Gary Heidnik. This marked the evolution of the genre from psychological horror to the intellectual thriller. These weren't just slashers, they were complex character studies that paved the way for modern hits like Mindhunter and Gone Girl.
But this legacy leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Is it ethical for authors to turn real pain into entertainment? Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan were real women, not plot points. Yet there is an argument that literature allows us to process real-world fears in a safe, controlled environment. By turning Ed Gein into Norman Bates, we contain the chaos. We give the story a beginning, a middle, and most importantly, an ending. Something real life rarely offers. We don't read these stories because we love monsters. We read them because we need to know that monsters can be understood, categorized, and eventually closed between the pages of a book. The farmhouse in Plainfield is dark now, but the library is lit. And as long as we have the stories, we have a way to turn on the light. So I have to ask, which literary adaptation handled the darkness better? The tragedy of Psycho, or the procedural intensity of Silence of the Lambs? Let me know in the comments. And for more deep dives into the history of literature, subscribe to Amplif 7.